In the amber glow of a late afternoon in Havenwood, a forgotten town nestled deep within the rolling hills of northern Appalachia, 73-year-old William "Will" Abernathy embarked on his customary evening stroll. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant pines, offered a comforting familiarity. Will, a man whose life had etched deep lines of quiet contemplation onto his face, considered these walks his daily ritual, a silent conversation with the world that had been his home since birth. He ambled along Miller's Road, a cracked stretch of asphalt winding past sleepy farmhouses, before yielding to the dense embrace of the forest. The woods, a constant, living entity, held the secrets of generations. Will had always felt a profound kinship with its wild inhabitants, a respect born from a lifetime of quiet observation. He'd witnessed deer ghosting through the trees at dawn, heard the haunting hoot of a great horned owl pierce the velvet dark, and even caught a fleeting glimpse of a black bear and her cubs lumbering through a berry patch. But he had never encountered anything quite like what stood before him now. There, in the middle of the road, where the asphalt met the gravel's shoulder, stood a bobcat. It wasn't darting away, wasn't poised for flight or fight as any wild creature should be. It stood with an unnerving stillness, its tufted ears erect, its gaze fixed directly on him. Its coat, a beautiful tapestry of tawny brown and dappled black, seemed to shimmer in the fading light. It was a magnificent animal, the very embodiment of the untamed spirit of the woods. Will stopped, his hand instinctively tightening on the smooth-worn wood of his walking stick. His heart gave a little flutter, a mix of awe and caution. Bobcats were notoriously elusive phantoms of the forest that preferred the shadows to the open road. This one, however, seemed to have no intention of disappearing. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his old leather boots making a soft crunch on the gravel. The bobcat didn't flinch. Instead, it watched him, its intelligent yellow-green eyes holding a strange intensity that seemed to penetrate the quiet dusk. "Well now," Will murmured, his voice a low, gravelly thing he rarely used outside of his own home. "Aren't you a sight to see?" He took another step, then another, moving with the slow, unthreatening gait of a man who understood the language of patience. He expected the bobcat to bolt at any moment, to melt back into the trees from which it had emerged, but it held its ground. As he drew closer, he could see the fine details of its face, the white fur around its muzzle, the dark lines that swept back from its eyes, the almost imperceptible twitch of its whiskers. When he was no more than 10 feet away, the bobcat did something that sent a shiver down Will's spine. It rose gracefully onto its hind legs. It was a movement of such deliberate poise that it seemed almost human. It took a hesitant step toward him, then another, its front paws held slightly aloft. Will stood frozen, a statue of weathered flannel and denim, his mind struggling to process the surreal scene unfolding before him. The bobcat closed the remaining distance, and with a delicacy that belied its wild nature, gently placed a paw on his leg. Its claws, Will noted with a jolt, were extended, but they rested against his jeans with the lightness of a feather not breaking the fabric. It was a touch, not an attack, a gesture. The bobcat then tilted its head back, its extraordinary eyes gazing up at him with an expression of such raw, desperate appeal that it stole the breath from his lungs. It was a look that transcended species, a silent plea that spoke of urgency and fear. A wave of profound empathy washed over Will, overriding his caution. The animal wasn't a threat. It was in trouble. He slowly, very slowly, raised his hand and reached out, letting the back of his fingers brush against the soft fur of the bobcat's cheek. The animal leaned into his touch, a low guttural sound, almost a purr, vibrating in its chest. In that moment, an invisible thread seemed to weave itself between them, a bond of mutual trust forged in the twilight on a lonely country road. "What is it, girl?" Will whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He stroked the bobcat's head, his calloused fingers sinking into the plush fur. "What are you trying to tell me?" The bobcat pulled back slightly, its paw dropping from his leg. It turned its head, casting a pointed glance back towards the dark wall of trees that lined the road, then fixed Will with a pleading look. It took a few steps toward the woods, stopped and looked over its shoulder, a clear and unmistakable invitation. "Follow me." A sane man, Will thought, would have backed away, slowly gone home, and poured himself a stiff drink. But Will had always been guided more by his heart than by common sense. He lived his life in these hills and understood that sometimes the world presented you with moments that defied explanation, moments that demanded a leap of faith. This was one of them. He nodded as if sealing a pact. "All right," he said softly. "All right, I'm coming. Lead the way." Trusting this strange, heartfelt encounter, Will followed the bobcat as it slipped off the road and into the deepening gloom of the forest. The animal moved with a silent, fluid grace, its dappled coat providing perfect camouflage against the forest floor. It kept a steady pace, always staying just ahead of him, frequently glancing back to ensure he was still there. The woods grew thicker, the trees crowding together, their branches weaving a dense canopy that blotted out the last of the evening sky. The air grew cooler, carrying the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. Will navigated the uneven terrain with practiced ease, his walking stick, his third leg. He'd spent countless hours in these woods as a boy, and his feet remembered the paths his mind had long forgotten. They went deeper than he had ventured in years, the familiar sounds of the roadside fading away, replaced by the whisper of the wind in the pines and the distant call of a whip-poor Will. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely no more than 10 minutes, the bobcat stopped. She had led him to a place where a great ancient oak had fallen long ago, its massive trunk now cloaked in a thick blanket of moss and ferns. The bobcat paused near a particularly dense thicket of underbrush that had grown up around the oak's gnarled root system. She looked at Will, then nudged her head toward the thicket, a soft, anxious chuff escaping her throat. Will's heart began to beat a little faster. He knelt the damp earth seeping through the knees of his jeans and carefully parted the tangled branches. He peered into the shadowy space beneath, and then his heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. There, nestled in a hollow of earth and leaves, lay two tiny bobcat kittens. They were impossibly small, their spotted fur matted and damp. One was trembling violently, its eyes squeezed shut in pain. The other lay terrifyingly still, its shallow, ragged breathing barely visible. Both had wounds, angry red gashes on their small bodies, one with a particularly nasty bite on its fragile back leg. They looked helpless, exposed, and on the very edge of life. It was a brutal scene, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the wild. It was clear they had been attacked, likely by a coyote or a fox, while their mother had been away hunting. A surge of adrenaline and a fierce protective instinct coursed through Will. He didn't hesitate. Years ago, after retiring from his job at the local lumber mill, he had taken a wildlife first aid course at the community college. It had been something to fill the long, empty days, a way to indulge his lifelong fascination with the natural world. He'd never imagined he would have to use it in such a desperate situation, but now the knowledge from that dusty old textbook came flooding back clear and precise. "Easy now, little ones," he murmured, his voice a soothing balm in the tense silence of the woods. "I'm here to help." He carefully shrugged off the small pack he always carried on his walks. Inside was a bottle of water, a half-eaten apple, and a soft red flannel shirt he kept for when the evening chill set in. He uncapped the water bottle and, pouring a small amount onto a clean corner of the flannel, began to gently, meticulously clean the kitten's wounds. They mewed weakly at his touch, tiny pathetic sounds that tore at his heart. The mother bobcat watched him, her body tense, but she made no move to interfere. She seemed to understand that he was their only hope. He cleaned away the dirt and dried blood, his large, rough hands moving with surprising gentleness. The wounds were deep, and he knew they needed more than his rudimentary care. But it was a start. Once they were clean, he tore a strip from the flannel shirt and loosely wrapped the injured leg of the larger kitten, hoping to offer some small measure of support. The smaller of the two was barely moving its body, cold to the touch. Will knew it was fading fast. Without a second thought, he unbuttoned his own jacket and shirt and carefully, reverently tucked the tiny, shivering creature against his chest, zipping his jacket up to create a warm, dark pouch. The kitten's faint heartbeat against his skin was a fragile, precious rhythm. He gently bundled the second kitten in the remains of the flannel shirt and held it securely in the crook of his other arm. He looked at the mother bobcat, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and a dawning, fragile hope. "I'm taking them to the vet," he said, as if she could understand his words. "Dr. Eliza Stone will know what to do. You can follow if you want." With a final, determined look, Will turned and began the arduous journey back through the woods. He moved as quickly as his old legs would allow, his every step careful, his focus entirely on the precious, fragile lives he held in his arms. The forest seemed to hold its breath as he passed the trees, standing as silent witnesses to his desperate mission. He could hear the soft padding of paws behind him and knew the mother bobcat was following, a silent, anxious shadow keeping pace with him. By the time he emerged from the tree line, the last vestiges of daylight had bled from the sky, and a smattering of stars had begun to appear. The lights of Havenwood twinkled in the distance, a beacon of hope. Will didn't stop to catch his breath. He broke into a shuffling jog, his lungs burning, his mind a frantic prayer. He had to get them there. He just had to. The Havenwood Veterinary Clinic was a small, welcoming building on the edge of town, its lights casting a warm yellow glow onto the deserted street. Dr. Eliza Stone, a kind, sharp-witted woman in her late 40s, was known for her dedication to all creatures great and small. Will burst through the door, the little bell above it announcing his frantic arrival. "Doctor." Stone looked up from her paperwork, her expression of surprise quickly shifting to one of professional concern as she took in the scene. Will, disheveled and breathless, clutching a bundle of red flannel with the distinct shape of a tiny animal visible inside his jacket. "Will, what on earth?" she began, but he cut her off. "It's kittens, Eliza," he panted, his voice ragged. "Bobcat kittens. They've been attacked. They're in a bad way." Dr. Stone didn't need another word. She was on her feet in an instant, her calm, authoritative presence filling the small reception area. "Bring them through now." She led him into the brightly lit examination room. Will carefully laid the flannel-wrapped kitten on the cool stainless steel table, and then with even greater care drew the smaller, colder one from inside his jacket. Dr. Stone's face grew grim as she saw the extent of their injuries. She worked with swift, practiced efficiency, her hands gentle but firm. She checked their vital signs, cleaned the wounds with antiseptic, and prepared tiny doses of antibiotics and pain relief. "You did well, Will," she said, her eyes not leaving the kittens. "Cleaning the wounds, keeping this little one warm, you may have saved its life." Will watched, his hands clenched at his sides, feeling utterly helpless now that the animals were in more capable hands. He felt a presence at his side and turned to see his wife, Eleanor, who must have heard the commotion from their attached house. Her face was a mask of concern. He'd forgotten to even call her. As Dr. Stone worked, a faint scratching sound came from the front door of the clinic. Will went to investigate. He peered through the glass pane and saw the mother bobcat standing on the doormat, her nose pressed against the glass, her eyes fixed on the lights of the examination room. She had followed him all the way. His heart ached for her. He opened the door a crack. "She's here," he said softly to Dr. Stone. "The mother. She won't leave." Dr. Stone paused her work and came to the door. She looked at the bobcat, at its unwavering, desperate gaze, and then back at the tiny, fragile bodies on her table. A look of profound compassion softened her features. In all her years as a vet, she had never seen anything like it. "Well," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips, "I can't very well leave a worried mother out in the cold." She made a decision that went against every rule in the veterinary handbook. "Bring in one of the large dog crates from the back, Will. We'll set her up in the corner. She deserves to be with her babies." And so the most unusual of patients were admitted to the Havenwood Veterinary Clinic. Will helped set up the crate with soft blankets and a bowl of water. They gently coaxed the mother bobcat inside, and she settled down without a fight, her eyes never leaving the table where Dr. Stone was working to save her young. The hours that followed were tense. Dr. Stone managed to stitch the gash on the larger kitten's leg and administered fluids to both. The smallest one, the one Will had held against his heart, was still dangerously weak. Its life hung by a thread. Will and Eleanor stayed late into the night, keeping a silent vigil with Dr. Stone, the only sounds the soft hum of the clinic's equipment and the anxious breathing of the mother bobcat in her corner. Days turned into a week. The clinic fell into a new, strange routine. The larger kitten, whom Eleanor had nicknamed Scout, began to recover quickly. He was a feisty little thing, hissing at Dr. Stone whenever she changed his dressing, but his appetite returned, and he began to move around his small enclosure with growing confidence. The smaller one, named Hope by Will, was a different story. Her recovery was painfully slow. For 3 days she hovered between life and death. Dr. Stone had to feed her with a dropper every 2 hours, and Will would often come and sit by her incubator, speaking to her in low, soothing tones, willing her to fight. The mother bobcat watched it all, a silent, stoic observer. Her presence seemed to have a calming effect on the kittens. Whenever she made a soft chuffing sound, they would stir as if reassured by her proximity. Dr. Stone, touched by the family's plight and the mother's extraordinary devotion, allowed her out of the crate for supervised visits. The mother would approach her kittens' enclosures and lie down as close as she could get, grooming them through the bars, with her rough tongue, her low purr, a constant comforting rumble. Word of the Bobcat family spread through the small town of Havenwood. People would stop by the clinic not to drop off their pets, but to ask for updates, to bring donations of food or old blankets. The story of the desperate mother who had sought out a human for help resonated deeply with the community. It was a tale of courage, trust, and a mother's undying love. Will was a fixture at the clinic. He visited every single day, his evening walks now rerouted to Dr. Stone's door. He would sit with the kittens sometimes, reading aloud from an old book of poems, his gravelly voice filling the quiet room. He felt a profound connection to these wild creatures, a sense of responsibility that went beyond his initial act of rescue. They had trusted him, and he would not let them down. After 2 long, arduous weeks, hope finally turned a corner. One afternoon when Will was there, she stood up on wobbly legs and took her first tentative steps. She let out a tiny squeaky meow, and Will felt tears well up in his eyes. He looked over at the mother bobcat, and for a fleeting moment he could have sworn he saw a look of pure, unadulterated gratitude in her intelligent yellow-green eyes. As the kittens grew stronger, their playful wild nature began to emerge. They tumbled and wrestled with each other, their tiny hisses and growls echoing in the clinic. The examination room was transformed into a temporary bobcat nursery. Dr. Stone knew they couldn't stay there forever. They were wild animals, and they belonged in the wild. She and Will began to plan for their release. They contacted the state's Fish and Wildlife Department and found the perfect location, a large protected state forest several miles from Havenwood, with a thriving ecosystem, and most importantly, no major predators. It was a safe haven where the Bobcat family could live out their lives in peace. The day of the release was bittersweet. A small crowd of townsfolk gathered at the clinic to say goodbye. Will carefully loaded the kittens, now robust and healthy, into a carrier, while Dr. Stone gently coaxed the mother into another. The drive to the state forest was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. They found a secluded spot, a sun-dappled clearing surrounded by towering pines. Will opened the carriers. The kittens bounded out immediately, their curiosity overriding any fear. They began to explore their new surroundings, chasing butterflies and pouncing on fallen leaves. The mother bobcat emerged more slowly. She stepped out of the crate and stood for a moment, her nose twitching, taking in the sense of her new home. She looked at her kittens, then she turned and looked at Will. She walked towards him, and for the second time she rose up and placed her paw gently on his leg. She held it there for a long moment, her gaze steady and clear. It wasn't a plea this time. It was a thank you, a farewell. Then with a final soft chuff, she turned and called to her kittens. They came running, and together the 3 of them disappeared into the deep green sanctuary of the forest, their dappled coats melting into the shadows until they were gone. Will stood there for a long time, listening to the silence of the woods, the space where the bobcats had been now filled with a profound sense of peace and rightness. He felt a hand slip into his. It was Eleanor. "You did a good thing, Will," she said softly. He nodded, a lump in his throat. He was just a quiet man from a quiet town, but for a few incredible weeks he had been part of something extraordinary. He had been trusted by a creature from another world, had held the fragile pulse of life in his hands, and had witnessed the unbreakable power of a mother's love. As he and Eleanor walked back to the car, Will knew he would never forget the bobcat with the intelligent eyes. The encounter had stirred something deep within him, a reminder that the world was full of wonder, and that sometimes the most profound connections are the ones that are never spoken. The heart-wrenching fear he'd felt in that dark thicket had been transformed into a heartwarming memory that would glow within him for the rest of his days, a silent, secret story shared between an old man and a wild, beautiful soul. This incredible story teaches us that empathy and compassion know no bounds, transcending species to forge powerful connections. It highlights the profound bond between a mother and her young and the incredible trust that can develop when we open our hearts to the natural world. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most meaningful acts of kindness and reshape our understanding of the world around us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Will's extraordinary journey. What part of the story resonated most with you? Share your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring tales. Video rating 9.5/10.